The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on the small black boy standing at the witness stand. Malik's hands trembled as he clutched the edge of the wooden rail, his voice caught somewhere between fear and determination. He glanced at the judge, a stern woman with sharp features softened by her patient gaze, and then toward the people who had tormented him, Steve and Karen Carter. They sat across the room, their polished appearance betraying none of the cruelty Malik had endured. Malik's heart pounded in his chest. He knew the truth would change everything, but fear gripped him like a vice. Swallowing hard, he opened his mouth. "They don't love me," he whispered, his words slicing through the tension in the room. "They only care about the money." The judge's expression darkened as the courtroom erupted into murmurs. For Malik, this was the moment hope began to outshine fear.
Before we dive into today's story, we'd love your support. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your engagement helps us create more inspiring stories just for you. Now, without further ado, let's get started.
From the outside, Steve and Karen Carter's home looked perfect. Nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the neatly trimmed lawn and flower beds bursting with color seemed to exude warmth and stability. Steve, a tall man with a polished demeanor, worked as an accountant, while Karen, always dressed in soft pastels, volunteered at church events and PTA meetings. They were the picture of a devoted foster family. But inside the house, Malik knew better. At just 12 years old, Malik had learned to keep quiet, keep his head down, and stay out of the way. The Carters didn't hit him, at least not in ways that left obvious marks, but the bruises on his arms and back told a different story. Malik winced every time Steve's hand gripped his shoulder too tightly or Karen yanked his arm when she was upset. Their words, however, cut even deeper. "You're lucky we took you in," Karen often hissed through gritted teeth whenever Malik hesitated with his chores. "Ungrateful kids like you don't get second chances." Steve was no better. His outbursts came suddenly, often triggered by trivial mistakes. Once Malik accidentally spilled a glass of water on the kitchen counter. Steve's face twisted with rage as he towered over the boy. "Do you have any idea how much I sacrifice for you?" he bellowed. "You don't deserve this roof over your head." Yet when visitors came by, the Carters transformed. They showered Malik with overly sweet words, calling him "our dear boy," and patting his shoulder as though he were their pride and joy. At church, Karen was quick to share stories of the troubled boy they were helping, her voice dripping with faux concern. Malik hated these moments the most. He hated the lies, the manipulation, and the way everyone seemed to believe them. Malik found his escape in his art. Sitting cross-legged on his bed, sketchpad balanced on his knees, he let his pencil move freely across the paper. Drawing gave him a sense of control in a world where everything felt uncertain. He often sketched scenes from his imagination, vast landscapes, animals, and superheroes, but the most precious drawings were those of his late grandmother. Her photo was the only thing Malik had managed to keep from his old life. The edges were frayed, and the colors had faded over time, but her smile remained vibrant. She had been his safe haven before cancer took her away. When the loneliness in the Carters' home became unbearable, Malik would stare at her photo and whisper, "I miss you, Nana." One evening, Malik drew a picture of her sitting on the front porch of her old house, knitting a scarf while he played at her feet. The memory brought tears to his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. Karen's voice broke the silence. "Malik, did you finish cleaning the kitchen?" Malik scrambled to hide his sketchpad under his mattress. "Yes, ma'am," he called back, his voice trembling. Karen appeared in his doorway, her arms crossed. "Don't you yes, ma'am me if you didn't wipe down the counters properly." Her gaze swept the room, and she narrowed her eyes. And don't think I don't notice you wasting time in here." Malik stared at the floor, his fists clenched. He knew better than to argue. School wasn't much of a refuge either. Malik's classmates rarely talked to him, and the teachers were too overwhelmed with their own challenges to notice his withdrawn demeanor. Except for Ms. Jordan, his homeroom teacher. She had noticed the dark circles under Malik's eyes and the way he flinched whenever someone raised their voice. She saw how he lingered at his desk after class, as if reluctant to go home. "Malik," she had said one afternoon, crouching to meet his gaze, "is everything okay at home?" Malik's heart raced. He wanted to tell her, to scream that no, nothing was okay, but fear stopped him. What if she told Steve and Karen? What if they found a way to make things worse? "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, forcing a small smile. Ms. Jordan's concerned expression didn't waver. "Well, if you ever need to talk, my door is always open, okay?" Malik nodded, but he didn't believe her. No one could help him. The Carters had built an impenetrable facade, one that made it nearly impossible for Malik to ask for help. They were experts at pretending. When a social worker came by for a surprise visit, the house sparkled, and Karen greeted her with a tray of cookies. "We just love having Malik here," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Malik sat stiffly on the couch, forcing himself to smile. The social worker's questions were pointed, but polite. "Malik, how are you adjusting?" Malik glanced at Steve, who gave him a subtle glare. "I'm fine," he muttered. The social worker seemed satisfied, jotting down notes before leaving with a cheerful, "You're doing a great job, Mr. and Mrs. Carter." As soon as the door closed, Steve's smile vanished. "If you ever embarrass us like that again, you'll regret it," he hissed. Malik's chest tightened as he retreated to his room. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Malik would sit by his window, staring at the stars. He imagined his grandmother up there, watching over him. Sometimes he'd whisper his fears aloud, hoping her spirit could hear him. "Why do I have to stay here, Nana?" he murmured one night, tears streaming down his face. "Why can't I come be with you?" In those quiet moments, he let himself hope that one day someone would see through the Carters' lies. Someone would care enough to help him escape. For now, Malik clung to his drawings and his memories, the only pieces of his old life that hadn't been stolen. Ms. Jordan had always prided herself on being observant. She wasn't just a teacher. She considered herself a mentor and protector for her students, especially those who seemed overlooked, and Malik stood out, though not in the ways she wished. From the first day of class, she had noticed his quiet demeanor. While other students chatted and laughed, Malik sat alone, hunched over his desk, his head often buried in his notebook. He was polite but distant, his answers short and hesitant. Over time, her concern grew. One morning, Malik shuffled into class later than usual. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and the dark circles under his eyes seemed deeper than before. Miss Jordan's heart sank as her eyes caught a faint bruise peeking out from beneath his sleeve when he reached to adjust his backpack. "Good morning, Malik," she greeted gently, her tone filled with warmth. He nodded without making eye contact and slid into his seat. As the students worked on their assignments, Ms. Jordan quietly approached his desk. "Hey, Malik," she said softly. "Can I see you for a moment after class?" His eyes darted up briefly, wide with apprehension, before he gave a small nod. When the bell rang, Ms. Jordan waited patiently at her desk as the other students filed out. Malik lingered, his movements slow and reluctant. He finally approached her desk, clutching the straps of his backpack as though it were a lifeline. "How are you doing today?" she asked, her voice calm and kind. "I'm fine," Malik replied quickly, too quickly. Ms. Jordan leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on her desk. "Malik, I've noticed you've seemed a little off lately. You've been coming to school tired and, well, I saw the bruise on your arm. Is everything okay at home?" Malik froze, his grip on his backpack tightening. "I'm fine," he repeated, avoiding her gaze. She frowned, but kept her tone gentle. "You know, you can talk to me if something's wrong. I want to help." For a moment, Malik's expression softened, as though he might say something. But then, a shadow of fear crossed his face, and he shook his head. "I'm okay," he mumbled, stepping back. Ms. Jordan didn't press him further. She knew trust wasn't built in a day. "All right," she said, offering a small smile. "Just remember, my door is always open. You don't have to go through anything alone." Malik nodded once before hurrying out of the room. Ms. Jordan couldn't shake the unease that lingered after their conversation. Over the next few days, she began paying closer attention to Malik. She noticed how he avoided group activities, always choosing a seat at the edge of the classroom. She saw how he flinched when someone spoke too loudly near him or brushed against his arm. During lunch breaks, she often spotted him sitting alone in the cafeteria, picking at his food or sketching in his notebook. One day, she noticed a crumpled sandwich wrapper on his desk and realized he hadn't been eating much at all. Her concerns deepened when she overheard a passing comment from one of Malik's classmates. "Malik said his foster parents don't waste money on extra food," the boy whispered to a friend, laughing as though it were a joke. Ms. Jordan's jaw tightened. There was no humor in what she was beginning to uncover. Determined to help, Ms. Jordan began gathering more information. She spoke discreetly with other teachers, asking if they had noticed anything unusual about Malik. "Now that you mention it," said Mr. Daniels, the PE teacher, "he's been sitting out of activities more often. He says he's tired or not feeling well." Mrs. Alvarez, who taught math, added, "He's always so quiet in class. I thought he was just shy, but now I wonder if something else is going on." Ms. Jordan made careful notes in her journal, each observation painting a clearer picture of the struggles Malik faced. One afternoon, as the students headed out for recess, Ms. Jordan stopped Malik at the door. "Malik," she said gently, "can I talk to you for a moment?" He hesitated but nodded, following her back to her desk. "I know we talked about this before," she began, "but I need to ask again. Are you sure everything's okay at home? You seem really tired lately, and I've noticed some bruises. I just want to make sure you're safe." Malik's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wanted to tell her everything. The yelling, the bruises, the loneliness. But Steve's voice echoed in his mind. "No one will believe you. You're just a foster kid." "I'm fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Jordan sighed, her heart aching for the boy in front of her. She leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Malik, I know it's hard to talk about these things, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here to help you, and there are other people who can help too. You're not as alone as you think." For a moment, Malik looked up at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but quickly closed it again, shaking his head. "Okay," Ms. Jordan said gently. "I won't push you, but if you ever need to talk, I'm here, and I want you to remember something. You deserve to feel safe and cared for. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Malik nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. He didn't say anything as he left the room, but Ms. Jordan noticed the slight hesitation in his step, as though her words had planted a small seed of hope. That evening, Ms. Jordan sat at her desk in the quiet of her home, going over her notes on Malik. Her heart ached for the boy who seemed so burdened by secrets he couldn't share. She resolved to keep a closer eye on him, to show him that someone cared. She didn't know when or if Malik would open up to her, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't give up on him, Malik sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, nibbling on a plain sandwich he'd packed himself that morning. The chaotic buzz of students laughing and talking around him made him feel smaller than usual. His math homework was open on the table, but he wasn't focused. Instead, he was sketching idly in the margins of his notebook, a habit that gave him comfort amidst the noise. "Mind if I sit here?" The voice startled him. Malik looked up to see a boy about his age standing across the table. He had a confident stance, an easy smile, and wore a hoodie slightly too big for him. Malik hesitated, but shrugged. "Sure." The boy plopped his tray onto the table with an exaggerated sigh. "Man, this school is wild. I've only been here 3 days, and I've already seen 2 fights and 1 kid fall asleep during gym class. Is it always like this?" Malik didn't respond, unsure of what to say. "I'm Jaden, by the way," the boy continued, unfazed by the silence. "What's your name?" "Malik," he mumbled, glancing back down at his notebook. Jaden tilted his head, noticing the faint sketch in the margins. "You draw?" "Sometimes," Malik replied cautiously, closing the notebook slightly. "That's cool," Jaden said, grinning. "I can't draw to save my life. My stick figures look like they're falling over, but I like seeing other people's stuff." Malik allowed a small smile to creep onto his face, though he kept his eyes on the table. Over the next few days, Jaden made a point of sitting with Malik during lunch. He talked endlessly about his favorite movies, his dislike for cafeteria food, and the crazy things he'd seen at his old school. Malik mostly listened, offering the occasional nod or short response, but Jaden didn't seem to mind. One afternoon, they were paired together during gym class for a basketball drill. Malik moved clumsily on the court, clearly uncomfortable, while Jaden dribbled the ball with ease. At one point, Jaden passed the ball to Malik, his gaze falling on Malik's wrist as his sleeve shifted. "Hey," Jaden said, frowning. "What happened there?" Malik quickly pulled his sleeve down, his movement stiff. "Nothing. I just bumped into something." Jaden raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Uh-huh, sure." Malik turned away, grabbing the ball. "It's nothing," he insisted, his voice sharp. Jaden didn't push further, but his expression remained thoughtful. Later that afternoon, the 2 boys walked home together, their steps echoing against the cracked sidewalk. Jaden slung his backpack over one shoulder, keeping pace with Malik. "You're not much of a talker, huh?" Jaden said after a while. Malik shrugged. "I just don't have much to say." "That's cool," Jaden replied, smirking. "I talk enough for both of us anyway." They walked in silence for a few minutes before Jaden spoke again, his tone more serious. "You know, I used to be in foster care too." Malik glanced at him, surprised. "You were?" "Yeah," Jaden said, kicking a loose pebble down the sidewalk. "Been through a couple of homes. Most of them were okay, but there was this one family. Man, they were awful. Always smiling in public, but behind closed doors, total nightmare." Malik's grip tightened on the straps of his backpack. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," Jaden continued. "I mean, who's going to listen to a foster kid, right? But one of my teachers noticed something was off. She kept asking me questions, and eventually, I told her everything. Scared me to death. But it was the best thing I ever did." Malik kept his eyes on the ground, his jaw clenched. "No one would believe me," he muttered. "Steve and Karen, they're good at making people believe what they want." Jaden stopped walking, turning to face Malik. "Hey, I get it. I really do. But you don't have to do this alone. There are people who care, teachers, social workers, even friends. If you ever want to talk to someone, I'll back you up." Malik hesitated, Jaden's words sinking in. He didn't know if he was ready to tell anyone, but for the first time, he felt like someone was in his corner. The next day, during lunch, Jaden slid into his usual seat across from Malik. "So, I've been thinking," he said, lowering his voice. "You're dealing with some serious stuff, aren't you?" Malik stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Jayden replied, leaning forward, "I've seen the bruises. I've seen the way you flinch when someone raises their voice, and I've heard the things Steve and Karen say to you when they pick you up after school." Malik's stomach dropped. "You don't know anything," he said defensively. "I know enough," Jayden said firmly. "Look, I'm not trying to get in your business, but you don't have to go through this alone. Ms. Jordan already knows something's wrong. You tell her the truth, and she'll help you. I'm telling you. She's one of the good ones." Malik shook his head. "What if they don't believe me? What if it just makes things worse?" Jayden placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "Then we make them believe you. I'll help you. Ms. Jordan will help you. But staying quiet won't make it better." That evening, Malik sat on his bed, replaying Jayden's words in his mind. He reached under his mattress and pulled out his sketchpad, flipping through the pages filled with drawings of his grandmother, his memories, and the faint outlines of the bruises he had started documenting. Maybe Jayden was right. Maybe there were people who cared. Malik stared at the photo of his grandmother, her kind eyes gazing back at him. "What should I do, Nana?" he whispered. For the first time, he let himself imagine what it would feel like to be free. Malik knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to prove what was happening inside the Carter household. Steve and Karen were experts at manipulation. They wore perfect smiles in public, their lies polished and believable. If Malik wanted anyone to believe him, he needed proof, real, undeniable proof. It was Jayden's idea at first. "You need receipts," Jayden had said one day at lunch, leaning in close so no one else could hear. "Not actual receipts," he added with a grin, "but stuff that proves they're lying. Recordings, pictures, anything." Malik had hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. "What if they catch me?" "They won't," Jayden replied confidently. "You're smarter than they think. Just be careful." Malik nodded, the seed of an idea taking root. That evening, Malik waited until Steve and Karen were occupied in the living room. Steve was watching the news with a scowl, and Karen was scrolling through her phone, muttering about the neighbors. Malik crept to his room, heart pounding, and pulled an old phone from the bottom of his closet. It was a little outdated, with a cracked screen and a battery that barely held a charge, but the camera still worked, and the microphone was surprisingly sensitive. Malik charged the phone quietly, his hands trembling with nerves. The first opportunity came sooner than he expected. A few days later, after dinner, Steve stormed into Malik's room, his face twisted with frustration. "Why are the dishes still in the sink?" he demanded, his voice booming. "I was about to do them," Malik stammered, scrambling off his bed. Steve took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't give me excuses, boy. You think you can just do whatever you want in this house?" Malik kept his head down, his heart racing as he reached for the phone he had hidden under a pile of books. He pressed the record button quietly, hoping Steve wouldn't notice. Steve's voice dripped with venom as he continued. "You're lucky we even let you stay here. You're nothing without us. You hear me?" "Yes, sir," Malik mumbled. Steve glared at him for a moment longer before turning and stomping out of the room. Malik exhaled slowly, the phone still clutched in his hand. When he played back the recording later, the audio was clear enough to capture every cruel word. Over the next few weeks, Malik became more confident in his efforts. He recorded Steve and Karen's arguments, capturing their disdainful remarks about him and the financial strain they claimed he caused. He took careful pictures of the bruises on his arms and legs, documenting them before they faded. One evening, Jayden asked, "How's it going with the evidence?" Malik showed him a few recordings and photos during their lunch break. Jayden's face darkened as he listened to Steve's voice berating Malik. "This is good," Jayden said. "Really good. But we still need something bigger, like proof they're using foster care money for themselves." Malik frowned, considering the suggestion. Steve had an office in the house where he kept all his financial paperwork. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in there that could expose them. That night, Malik waited until the house was quiet. Steve and Karen had gone to bed, their door shut tight. The creaky floorboards seemed louder in the stillness as Malik tiptoed toward the office. He pressed his ear against the door, listening for any sounds. Nothing. Carefully, he turned the doorknob and slipped inside. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and paper. Steve's desk was cluttered with invoices, receipts, and bank statements. Malik's hands shook as he sifted through the mess, scanning for anything that looked important. After a few minutes, he found a folder labeled Foster Care Finances. His heart pounded as he opened it and flipped through the pages. Inside were detailed statements of the foster care stipends Steve and Karen received. Money meant for Malik's care. But the expenditures listed told a different story. Luxury clothing, expensive dinners, and even a weekend getaway. Malik quickly pulled out his phone and began snapping photos of the documents, his hands trembling. Just as he finished, he heard footsteps approaching. Malik's breath caught in his throat as Steve's heavy footsteps grew louder. In a panic, he shoved the folder back into the drawer and slid under the desk, clutching his phone tightly. The door creaked open, and Steve stepped inside, muttering under his breath. He grabbed a pen from the desk and lingered for a moment, glancing around suspiciously. Malik held his breath, willing himself to stay still. After what felt like an eternity, Steve finally left, closing the door behind him. Malik waited until the footsteps faded completely before crawling out from under the desk. His legs were trembling as he slipped back to his room, heart racing. The next day, Malik shared the photos with Miss Jordan. Her eyes widened as she flipped through them, her expression grave. "Malik," she said softly, "this is serious. This is exactly the kind of proof we need." Malik nodded, though exhaustion was etched into his face. "I just want it to be over," he murmured. Miss Jordan gave him a reassuring smile. "You've done an incredible job. I'll take this to the school counselor and add it to the report. We'll get you out of there." But Steve and Karen weren't fools. Steve began checking Malik's room more frequently, searching for anything that might incriminate them. One evening, he found Malik's backpack lying open on the floor and rifled through it, coming up empty. Still, his paranoia grew. "You've been acting weird lately," Steve said at dinner one night, his eyes narrowing at Malik. "If you're up to something, you'd better stop. I'm not playing games." Malik kept his head down, silently eating his meal, but his heart pounded in his chest. He knew he was walking a dangerous line. Despite the growing tension at home, Malik continued his efforts. He and Jaden met regularly during lunch, huddling in a quiet corner of the schoolyard to discuss their progress. "You're doing great," Jaden said one afternoon, giving Malik a firm pat on the shoulder. "They're scared. That's a good thing. It means they know you're onto them." Malik gave a small nod, though his chest felt heavy. "I just want this to be over." "It will be," Jaden said confidently. "Soon." Together, Malik and Ms. Jordan prepared their findings. The photos of bruises, the recordings of Steve's verbal outbursts, and the financial documents painted a damning picture of the Carters' neglect and manipulation. But at home, the hostility only grew. Steve's temper flared more frequently, and Karen's passive-aggressive remarks cut deeper. Malik felt like he was walking on eggshells, constantly on edge. One evening, as Malik sat on his bed, staring blankly at his homework, he heard a knock at the window. He turned to see Jaden standing outside, holding up his phone with the flashlight on. "What are you doing here?" Malik whispered as he opened the window. "I needed to see you," Jaden said. "You looked miserable today. Are you okay?" Malik hesitated, then shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I feel like I'm trapped. They've taken everything from me, and now everyone thinks they're perfect. I don't know what to do." Jaden's expression hardened. "Then we fight back harder," he said firmly. "You've got me, Ms. Jordan, and the caseworker on your side. You're not alone, Malik. You just have to hang in there." Malik stared at Jaden, his chest tight. The weight didn't feel as heavy with Jaden's unwavering support. For the first time in days, a flicker of hope sparked within him. The courtroom was as intimidating as Malik had imagined. The tall ceilings, polished wooden benches, and solemn faces of the judge and lawyers made him feel small. His hands clutched the edges of his seat, his heart pounding as he glanced nervously toward the other side of the room. Steve and Karen Carter sat with their lawyer, impeccably dressed as always. Steve wore a dark suit, his expression composed but calculated, while Karen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the heartbroken mother. "You're doing great," Ms. Jordan whispered, placing a reassuring hand on Malik's shoulder. Beside him, Jaden gave him a nod of encouragement, but Malik wasn't sure he could believe them. The Carters' lawyer stood first, his polished demeanor matching the couple he represented. "Your Honor, my clients Steve and Karen Carter have gone above and beyond in providing a stable and loving home for Malik," he began, gesturing toward them. "Raising a foster child, particularly one with a difficult past, is no small task. Yet they've faced every challenge with patience and kindness." Malik's stomach churned as he watched Steve offer the judge a humble smile, the kind that had fooled so many people before. Karen sniffled theatrically, her tissue pressed to her nose. "Unfortunately," the lawyer continued, "traumatized children can sometimes misinterpret strict discipline as something more sinister. My client's actions were always rooted in love and a desire to help Malik thrive." Malik clenched his fists under the table, anger bubbling beneath his fear. The lies were so blatant, so well rehearsed, and yet they hung in the air like an unshakable shadow. Steve took the stand next, adjusting his tie as he sat down. His voice was heavy with emotion, carefully measured to elicit sympathy. "Your Honor," he began, "taking Malik into our home was one of the most fulfilling decisions of our lives. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we wanted to give him a chance at a better future." He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "He's been through so much, and we've done everything we could to make him feel safe and supported. It hurts to think that he might feel otherwise." Malik wanted to scream, but he stayed silent, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his seat. Karen followed, her voice trembling. "Malik is like a son to us," she said, clutching her tissue tightly. "We've tried so hard to break through to him, but it's been difficult. All we want is what's best for him." The judge, a stern woman with sharp features and kind eyes, nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes. Her expression was unreadable, and Malik felt the weight of doubt settle on his chest. Finally, it was Malik's turn. Ms. Jordan gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze as his name was called. "You've got this," she whispered. Malik rose slowly, his legs trembling as he walked to the witness stand. The large wooden chair dwarfed his small frame, and he felt every pair of eyes in the room on him. The judge's voice was calm but firm. "Take your time, Malik. There's no rush." Malik nodded, his hands gripping the edges of the stand. He glanced toward Steve and Karen, who were staring at him with cold, expectant expressions. For a moment, fear paralyzed him. Then he saw Ms. Jordan and Jaden sitting in the audience, their encouraging smiles giving him the strength he needed. "They're lying," Malik began, his voice trembling but clear. "They don't care about me. At home, they're not like this." Steve leaned forward in his seat, but the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Carter, you will remain silent while the witness speaks." Malik swallowed hard and continued. "They yell at me all the time. Steve grabbed my arm once when he was mad. He pushed up his sleeve to reveal the faint bruise still visible on his arm. And they only care about the money they get for fostering me. I heard Steve say it on the phone. The courtroom was silent as Malik reached into his pocket and pulled out his old phone. His hands shook as he handed it to the bailiff. "There are recordings on here," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper, "of them yelling at me. And I took pictures of the bruises and the papers I found in Steve's office. They've been spending the foster care money on themselves." The bailiff handed the phone to the judge, who listened to one of the recordings through headphones. Her expression darkened as Steve's voice echoed faintly in the silent courtroom. Jaden was called to the stand next. He sat confidently, his sharp eyes scanning the room as he began. "I've seen how Steve treats Malik," he said, his tone steady. "He's rough, and he talks to him like he's nothing. One time, I saw him grab Malik's arm and drag him into the car. Malik looked scared, but Steve acted like it was normal." The judge nodded, making more notes. "And Malik told me about the money," Jaden continued. "How they only act nice when people are watching. Everything he's saying, it's true." Malik felt a surge of gratitude as Jaden stepped down, giving him a small smile of reassurance. Finally, Ms. Jordan took the stand. She spoke with clarity and conviction, recounting her observations of Malik's withdrawn behavior, the bruises she had noticed, and the financial discrepancies she had helped uncover. "Malik has shown incredible courage coming forward," she said, her voice steady. "But he shouldn't have had to. The evidence speaks for itself. Steve and Karen Carter have failed to provide a safe and supportive environment for this child." The judge leaned back in her chair, her face serious as she scanned the evidence. After a brief recess, the courtroom fell silent as the judge returned. She cleared her throat, and every eye turned toward her. After reviewing the evidence, including testimony from Malik, Jaden, and Ms. Jordan, as well as the financial records and audio recordings presented, the court finds overwhelming evidence of neglect and financial fraud on the part of Steve and Karen Carter. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Steve shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. This kid is lying. We've done nothing but care for him." "Sit down, Mr. Carter," the judge commanded, her tone icy. Steve hesitated, but eventually dropped back into his seat, his fists clenched. The judge continued, her gaze firm. "Effective immediately, Mr. Carter, you are under arrest for child neglect and financial fraud." Two bailiffs approached Steve, who stumbled backward in shock. "You can't do this! I have rights!" he shouted, but the bailiffs cuffed him and led him toward the exit. Karen sobbed quietly, clutching at Steve's arm as he was taken away. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said, turning her attention to her, "you will remain under investigation and are barred from fostering any children indefinitely. Your level of involvement will be determined in subsequent hearings." Karen collapsed into her chair, her cries echoing through the courtroom. Malik sat frozen in his seat, watching the scene unfold. Relief washed over him, but so did a hollow ache. Once again, he was losing a place he had tried, however unsuccessfully, to call home. As the courtroom emptied, Ms. Jordan leaned in. "You were brave today, Malik. You should be proud of yourself." Malik nodded, though his hands still trembled. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "You'll be placed with a new family," Ms. Jordan said gently. "But Malik, I've been thinking about something." He looked up at her, confused. "How would you feel about staying with me?" Malik's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. "With you?" Ms. Jordan nodded. "I know it's a big question, and you don't have to decide right away, but I'd like to give you the kind of home you deserve, a real one." Tears welled in Malik's eyes as her words sank in. For the first time in years, hope felt real. The air in the courtroom felt heavier as the judge took her seat once more, her expression unreadable. Malik sat stiffly, his hands gripping the edges of the wooden table. He could feel the tension radiating from across the room, where Steve and Karen Carter sat. Steve's jaw was clenched tight, and Karen dabbed her eyes with her tissue, though no real tears fell. Miss Jordan leaned closer to Malik, her voice a soft whisper. "No matter what happens, you've done something incredibly brave today. You've told the truth." Malik nodded slightly, though his heart was racing. He glanced at Jayden, who gave him an encouraging smile and mouthed, "You've got this." The judge cleared her throat, and the room fell into complete silence. After reviewing all evidence, including financial records, audio recordings, photographic evidence, and testimonies from Malik, Ms. Jordan, and Jayden, this court finds Steve and Karen Carter guilty of child neglect and financial fraud. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Steve immediately shot to his feet, his face red with rage. "This is outrageous. We've done nothing wrong. That boy is lying." The judge raised her hand sharply. "Sit down, Mr. Carter." Her voice was icy, commanding authority. Steve hesitated, but eventually sank back into his seat, muttering under his breath. Karen's sobs grew louder as the judge continued. "Mr. Carter, you have not only failed to provide a safe and supportive environment for Malik, but have also exploited the foster care system for personal financial gain. Your actions have caused significant harm to a child entrusted to your care. Effective immediately, you are to be taken into custody for child neglect and fraud." Two bailiffs approached Steve, who stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "You can't do this!" he shouted, his voice shaking with anger. "This is all a misunderstanding. That kid is manipulating everyone." The bailiffs restrained him, their grips firm as they secured the handcuffs around his wrists. Karen reached out toward him, her face pale. "Steve, don't make this worse." But Steve was already being escorted out of the courtroom, his protests echoing down the hallway. The judge turned her attention to Karen, who now sat trembling in her seat. "Mrs. Carter, your complicity in these actions is deeply troubling. While your level of involvement will be determined in subsequent hearings, you are hereby barred from fostering any children indefinitely. You will also remain under investigation for neglect and fraud." Karen collapsed into tears, her hands shaking as she tried to stammer out a response. "Your Honor, please, I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was just trying to help." "Enough," the judge interrupted firmly. "This is not a discussion. The evidence speaks for itself." Malik sat quietly, his emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. Relief flooded through him, knowing Steve and Karen could no longer hurt him. But that relief was tangled with uncertainty about what came next. The judge looked directly at him, her stern expression softening slightly. "Malik, you've shown incredible courage in coming forward today. Your bravery has not gone unnoticed, and because of your actions, steps are being taken to ensure you are placed in a safe and supportive environment." She glanced at the caseworker sitting nearby. "Malik will be reassigned to temporary care while the proper arrangements are made for his long-term placement." The words hung in the air, both a promise and a weight. Malik looked down at his hands, unsure how to feel. After the courtroom emptied, Ms. Jordan stayed by Malik's side, her presence steady and reassuring. Jayden lingered for a moment before walking over and placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You did it, man," Jayden said with a small grin. "You told the truth, and it mattered. Don't forget that." Malik nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thanks, Jayden," he whispered. Jayden gave him a firm pat on the back before leaving with his parents. As Malik sat alone with Ms. Jordan, she turned to him, her voice gentle. "Malik, I know this isn't easy. What you've been through is more than anyone should ever have to face." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "What happens now?" he asked softly. Ms. Jordan hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about that," she said carefully. "You've been through so much already, and I don't think you should have to keep starting over. I'd like to offer you a home with me. Malik's eyes widened in surprise. With you? Yes, Ms. Jordan said with a warm smile. It's not official yet, and you'd have to decide if it's what you want. But I'd like to give you the kind of home you deserve, a real one. You've shown so much strength, Malik, and I want to help you build a future where you feel safe and cared for. For a moment, Malik couldn't speak. The words caught in his throat as tears welled in his eyes. No one had ever offered him something like this before. You really mean it? He asked finally, his voice trembling. Ms. Jordan reached out and placed a gentle hand over his. I wouldn't say it if I didn't. That evening, Malik stepped into Ms. Jordan's home for the first time. The house was warm and inviting, with soft yellow walls and shelves filled with books and family photos. The scent of fresh-baked cookies lingered in the air, and Malik felt a strange mix of nervousness and comfort. Ms. Jordan introduced him to her daughter, Nia, a girl about his age with a bright smile and a confident demeanor. Hi there, Nia said, extending her hand. I'm Nia. Mum's been talking about you non-stop. Oh, and she made cookies. Her chocolate chip ones are the best. Malik hesitated before shaking her hand. Hi, he said quietly. Welcome home, Malik, Ms. Jordan said softly, watching him take in his surroundings. That night, as Malik lay in the small but cozy room Ms. Jordan had prepared for him, he stared out the window at the stars. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of safety, a fragile but growing hope. Maybe this is what it feels like to have a real family, he whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. And for the first time in a long time, Malik allowed himself to believe that better days were ahead. Malik stood hesitantly in the doorway of Ms. Jordan's home, clutching his backpack tightly. The house was nothing like the sterile, cold environment of the Carters. Soft yellow walls reflected the warm afternoon light, shelves lined with books, and framed family photos adorned the living room, and the aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air. This is your home now, Malik, Ms. Jordan said with a reassuring smile. Come in, make yourself comfortable. A girl about Malik's age, with bright eyes and a cheerful demeanor, stepped into the hallway. She wore a blue sweater that seemed to match her confident smile. Hi there, she said, extending her hand. I'm Nia. Mom's been talking about you all week, and just so you know, I'm the reigning board game champion around here. You've been warned. Malik hesitated before shaking her hand. Hi, he mumbled. And I'm Michael, came a voice from the kitchen. A tall man with sandy brown hair and a kind smile appeared, drying his hands on a dish towel. Welcome, Malik. We're really glad to have you here. Malik glanced at Ms. Jordan, unsure how to respond. She gave him an encouraging nod. Let's show you your room, she said gently. The room was small but cozy, with light green walls and a bed covered in a patchwork quilt. A wooden desk sat by the window, and on it was a framed photo of Malik from school. He stared at it in surprise. How did... he began, turning to Ms. Jordan. I wanted it to feel like your space, she said softly. If there's anything you'd like to add, just let me know. Malik set his backpack on the bed, running his fingers over the quilt. It's nice, he murmured. Nia leaned against the doorway, grinning. Fair warning, Dad takes board games way too seriously. He'll probably challenge you to a match before dinner. Don't listen to her, Michael called from the hallway. She's the one who cheats. Malik let out a small laugh, surprising himself. I don't really know how to play board games, he admitted. No worries, Nia said brightly. We'll teach you. Dinner that evening was unlike anything Malik had experienced in years. The table was set with mismatched plates and glasses, and the air buzzed with light-hearted conversation. So, Malik, Michael said, passing him a bowl of mashed potatoes. Do you have a favorite food? We'll have to add it to the menu. Malik shrugged. I don't know. I guess I like spaghetti. Spaghetti it is then, Michael said with a grin. Nia leaned over, pointing to the plate in front of Malik. Better eat up now, though. Mom's meatloaf is legendary. It's okay to laugh, Ms. Jordan teased. I know they're right. Malik smiled faintly, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Over the following weeks, Malik began to settle into his new home. At first it was awkward. He was used to keeping his head down, avoiding attention, and tiptoeing through each day to avoid making mistakes. But the Jordans didn't make him feel like he was walking on eggshells. They were patient, kind, and never raised their voices. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table sketching, Ms. Jordan walked in and peered over his shoulder. That's beautiful, Malik, she said, her voice genuine. He shrugged. It's just something I like to do. Well, you're really talented, she said. Maybe we can look into some art classes for you, if you're interested, that is. Malik's eyes widened. Really? Of course, she replied. I want to help you pursue the things that make you happy. Nia quickly became a source of comfort for Malik. Her easygoing nature and quick wit made her easy to talk to, and she seemed determined to make him feel at home. One Saturday afternoon, she dragged him outside to play basketball in the driveway. Come on, Malik, she said, tossing him the ball. I need a partner for one-on-one. Malik hesitated. I'm not really good at sports. Doesn't matter, Nia replied with a grin. I'm just going to win anyway. Despite himself, Malik laughed. Slowly but surely, Malik began to open up. He shared bits and pieces of his past with Ms. Jordan during quiet moments on the porch or while helping her in the kitchen. There were times I didn't think anyone cared, he admitted one evening, staring at the stars. Ms. Jordan placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You're not alone anymore, Malik. We're here for you, always. Her words felt like a promise, one that he desperately wanted to believe. One day, Ms. Jordan surprised Malik with a trip to an art supply store. She handed him a small basket and said, Pick out whatever you need. Malik hesitated, unsure if she meant it. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said gently, but I want to. Tentatively, Malik selected a few sketch pads, pencils, and a set of colored markers. For the first time in years, he felt like his passion for art wasn't just something to hide, it was something worth nurturing. The true turning point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Malik was sitting on the couch, flipping through one of his sketchbooks when Michael joined him. What you working on? Michael asked casually. Just some sketches, Malik replied, holding the book closer to his chest. Can I see? Malik hesitated, but finally handed it over. Michael flipped through the pages, his face lighting up with admiration. Malik, these are incredible, he said. You've got a real gift. Malik's cheeks flushed with pride. Thanks, he murmured. As the weeks turned into months, Malik began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. He no longer flinched at loud noises or avoided eye contact with adults. He laughed more often, played board games with Nia, and spent hours sketching in the sunlit corner of the living room. One night, as he lay in bed staring at the stars, he whispered, Thank you, Nana. For the first time in years, he believed he was exactly where he was meant to be. As Malik sat on the porch one quiet evening, the cool breeze rustled the leaves above him and the stars began to dot the sky. He clutched his sketch pad, tracing a picture of his grandmother's kind smile with his pencil. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of fear or the sting of loneliness pressing on his chest. This home, with Ms. Jordan, Naya, and Michael, wasn't just a place to stay. It was a place to heal. Slowly but surely, he was learning to trust again, to laugh without restraint, and to dream about the future. His mind wandered to the court case, the evidence he had gathered, and the courage it had taken to speak out. Malik realized that he wasn't just a survivor of the Carters' neglect. He was an example of how truth and perseverance could bring change. Looking up at the stars, he whispered, "Thank you, Nana. I think you'd be proud." Malik's story is one of resilience, courage, and hope. But too many children still suffer in silence, their voices drowned out by fear. You can be part of the solution by standing up for vulnerable kids in your community. If you see something, say something. Your actions could make all the difference. Let's work together to create a world where every child feels safe, valued, and loved. If you found Malik's journey inspiring, please like this video, share it, and subscribe for more stories of hope and justice.